Okay, guys, we're live.
All right. All right. So I'll hit the intro. What? Welcome to the Open Peace Podcast. I'm Jared. Yeah, Kanan and Amir Abudka unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but we do have our guest, Rafi. And Rafi, you wanted to come on the show because you had an idea that,
Sure.
yeah, that like from what I was told, you came up with a Palestinian friend about an idea of a federation system. Like went into some detail about it. Yeah, so tell us
Sure.
about it.
Sure. He mentioned that you guys interviewed him a few days ago. My friends are here.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
we did
we did.
indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So our idea. Well, I met him maybe a few months ago. I was doing an interview debate with Ryan Belarus on whether or not Jews or Palestinians were indigenous and what that all means. And then so after the show, we started chatting and talking about the history of Israel and Palestine and different cultures. And I had this idea to do like a show, and we actually started. We did a show called The History of Israel-Palestine, the Search for a Common Narrative. And we're talking about anthropology, genetics, and all sorts of stuff. I'll mention I work in biotechnology here in Jerusalem, doing genetic sequencing. And as sort of a pastime, I get involved in peace activism and stuff. I was involved when I was in university. I started a group where we'd bring Jews and Muslims together to talk about Israel-Palestine conflict and just culture in general. And I've been involved in various projects ever since. So our plan for a federation was basically we started, when we were talking about doing this thing, he said, how about first we talk about a federation? Because I had mentioned that I had thought that was a cool idea. And then so we decided to let's see if we could write a plan together. Let's say, I was in charge of Israel and he was in charge of Palestine. It was just the two of us negotiating. And how would we make this federation? And my perspective is because I live in Yerushalayim, like it's really impractical to split the city of Jerusalem and put any kind of like physical barrier. We have like almost 1 million people. We have 350,000 Arabs or Palestinians. Most of them don't have citizenship, but they live in all sorts of different neighborhoods all over the city, and they work all over the city. And there's Israeli Jews shop in their neighborhoods, they shop in our neighborhoods. It's really impractical to run this city sort of separate, and it's not really segregated now. So this doesn't seem really practical to like segregate a non-segregated city just because other parts of the country are worried about Arabs coming to their town. It doesn't seem so practical. So
I agree with you, Rafi.
So the bare minimum, I would say, even if let's say you did like a two-state solution, right? The bare minimum, I would say, to make that work, you'd have to have Jerusalem sort of as a shared city between the two countries. You'd have roughly based on the 67 borders with minor adjustments. Once you share Jerusalem, you'd end up with fully open borders because you could cross through Jerusalem, and we're not going to want a wall around Jerusalem. We're not going to be trapped here, and we're not going to want a wall in the middle. So then you end up with two countries with a shared capital. You'd have a massive amount of population who lived in the West Bank, both Jews and Palestinians would work in Israel, so they would need to come here. So it wouldn't really make sense to have two economies. It'd be the shekel's a pretty strong currency. There's no reason to make two currencies. So now you have a shared currency, a shared capital. That's the territory of the both countries. And then to manage this, you'd have a shared security regime because you're now sharing your capital. Who's defending the capital, right? That's what a military is supposed to do. So now you have a shared currency, a shared military, and a shared capital. You're something like Belgium, It's sort of two countries that are sharing all this stuff in common. And I said, well, that's some kind of confederation already there. So then, okay, so if we're going to do some kind of confederation or federation, what would it look like? So we started to play around with the ideas, and what we came up with something a little different, a little less like Belgium and a little more like Switzerland, where we divided the regions up into multiple states instead of like the sort of common version of like a two-state federation where it's like the West Bank and Israel and a shared Jerusalem. We divided it up into an even number of states that were Jewish and Palestinian. And I also had this idea because I was working with the Federation movement with Emmanuel Shachef and Ari Hess, and they did a federation without Gaza, and it had like 30 cantons, and 20 of them would be Jewish majority, and 10 of them would be Palestinian majority or Arab majority without Gaza. And the population without Gaza is roughly 2/3, 1/3. So one time I went with my friend Kamal Nawash, who had also an idea about a federation as a Palestinian activist who's in the United States. He's originally from Jerusalem, and Emmanuel, and we went to meet Yehuda Glick, who's an activist for temple rights stuff. We were all talking about a federation. So Kamal basically said it was the Palestinians. Like, this all sounds good to me, but we would go along with it if you guys were doing it, but sort of tacitly. We're not going to actively support it unless you include Gaza, because he's like, I'm from Jerusalem. I can't say that Gaza is not going to be part of my solution. These guys are just as Palestinian as me. Who am I to kick them out of the party? Mm-hmm. And it would have to be something like 50-50, instead of 2/3, 1/3, and neither side's going to want to be dominated. If we're going to be partners, we should go in, half and half, and have some kind of right of return. He's like, it's not going to be like millions of people showing up all at once, but like if 30,000 Jews make Aliyah this year, we could have a similar number of Palestinians making Aliyah, just to be fair. You can't really sell that I get to move back here and you don't. So like,
do you think logistically that would work, having like that equal number of people making the Aliyah?
Yeah, I mean, actually, when I started working with Zahir, I was like, yeah, let's just let any Jew wants to move there, any Palestinian. It's not really like just like all the Jews from New York aren't really going to make Aliyah next year. All the Palestinians in the world aren't really going to make Aliyah. It's not really practical. There's jobs and housing and realistic concerns. So like, I'm like, it would probably work out. He's like, nah, man, you gotta do something like practical. We got to be like a real country. Because once you say, because right now you have, like, we say all the Jews can make Aliyah and basically no Palestinians can. So we don't really reach our capacity to integrate people. Like, as more people move here, you have to have housing, jobs, and integration into your society. The only time we've really hit that that maximum was like when there was the massive immigration of the Mizrahi Jews, like at the founding of the state, and all of a sudden within maybe like 6 years you had almost double the population immigrate, and there was all sorts of problems. There were the Mabarot, they ended up in refugee camps. There was a lot of ethnic tension between the Ashkenazi and Mizrahi because you had this, an equal sized population all of a sudden move in with a very different culture. Yeah. So he's like, why don't we set up something that's more realistic, like a normal country, where we say we'll have like some kind of ratio of the population that lives there, move there on a regular basis, and integrate them in society. And also it would sort of prevent the sort of demographic, conflict in a way. Like if you had there's this idea of 2 states, 1 homeland. So where you have 2 states, but any number of Jews can move to Israel, and any number of Palestinians can move to Palestine, but they can all move to the other state as soon as they make Aliyah. So you could end up with a situation where you have like millions of Palestinians in Israel and millions of Jews living in Palestine, and neither of them are citizens. And you'd have complete cities full of like non-citizens generation after generation that aren't fully being represented, and you create kind of a mess. So Right. So the advantage, I would say, of a federation, in addition to the first, you have a common military, a common economy. You also have a common immigration regime, so you could have a reasonable amount. And so the current population is like 54% Jewish to about 46% Arab. That's where we're about holding now. And that includes
obviously, right?
What?
Well, which obviously fluctuates. Sometimes maybe the Palestinian population could grow.
Yeah. You could have like subtle variation, but like the population growth rates are pretty similar amongst the 2 groups, around 2% annually, and slightly higher for the Jews because of the Haredim. But you could manage that through you could say, okay, 2% or 5% more Palestinians can immigrate, and it would sort of balance out. And we don't want to have like it doesn't need to be exactly 50-50 on the mark, but like more or less. We did like a constitution, like a draft constitution, like an example of what it doesn't have to be exactly our plan and obviously our map, but we just like if we had to write this constitution, what would we do? So we did a proposal, and so we would say like roughly, let's say we can increase the Aliyah to let's say 50,000 or something, and you could let 50,000 Palestinians and 50,000 Jews move in annually, and you can adjust it as you go along and see how things actually play out. But that sort of construct, and we polled this large number of Palestinians, and they all seem pretty cool with it. we also in our plan we did something like similar to what they do in Canada, sort of the immigration scheme, where in Canada, if you immigrate to Canada, you also immigrate to a province, right? You want to go to Quebec, you have to immigrate also both to Quebec and to Canada. And if you want to go to Ontario, you immigrate to Ontario and to Canada. And for the first few years, you agree, I'm going to move to Quebec or I'm going to move to Ontario. And the idea is because the people in the Quebecois, the French speakers, they wanted to maintain Quebec as sort of a French province. You know, they didn't want all these English speakers to move there and sort of change their culture. So they would sort of prioritize French speakers, you know, give to some level. And the reverse in Ontario, they would prioritize English speakers and sort of maintain that. So we thought that we divided the country up into states, like eight states had a Jewish majority and 8 states had an Arab majority. And the Arab majority states could prioritize letting Arab immigrants move and under some, you know, fair, you know, division. Let's say it's like a province that's, 80% Arab, they could let, 4 out of 5 immigrants that are Arab move there. And if we had, like, say the Tel Aviv province was like 80%, Jewish, you could say like, we'll let 4 out of 5, people who immigrate there, Jews, like new immigrants. And then after a certain number of years, people, they could move around. You don't have to be too very strict about things, but you let it breathe a little bit. That was our idea. And we had that the Constitution, you would have to have like a supermajority in both houses of Parliament in order to overrule it. So it's not like if all of a sudden you're 48 to 52, the whole thing falls apart. It doesn't. It can be a little bit flexible. It's that it more or less has to be 50-50. And we did a bicameral Parliament, so you have a House and a Senate. So each one of the canton states, provinces, whatever you want to call them, we call them states in our plan. We sort of took a vote what name we liked. And each one would get, let's say, 4 senators. So there were 16 states, and so you end up with a Senate of 64 people, and roughly 32 of them would be Jewish, and 32 of them would be Arab or Palestinian. And then the House of Representatives would be by populations, roughly 13 million people here, and for every, let's say, 100,000 people, you get 1 seat in the House of Representatives. So it would be like roughly, 75 Jews and Arabs in that. It could be a little variation. It wouldn't really make, there's also Jerusalem and Samaritans and other people that they don't quite fit into either box, and they could also run for Parliament, obviously. But more or less that would be the scheme.
Okay. And in terms of like one of my big worries from everything that you've just said, right, coming from an Israeli perspective, would be joint security, right? We've been in a conflict now for 100 years. Hamas are armed up the wazoo, Hezbollah on the border. There's so much going on. Why, how can we suddenly, become buddies and secure our borders together? That's
because like I like the way it does feel like a pipe dream, because there are huge problems standing in the way of like this idea coming to fruition, and militants are a huge part of that.
Sure. I feel like there's 2 questions here.
Not even just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. Like there's a bunch of people who would do like the second, like we make this a single country with a single economy, a single like internal border with no checkpoints.
Yeah.
Life is going to get a lot more violent.
I would think not, but I mean, there's really 2 questions here. There's like the overall structure. Let's say we've already done this. With the vision for how security would be run was we would have a single army with you wouldn't have militias, you wouldn't have armed, there wouldn't be a Hamas armed. There would be a single army. You'd basically start with the IDF, and you could rename it the IPDF. Now we're Israel Palestine United Army. It would basically be the IDF, and we currently have Druze and Bedouins, and so you would increase the number of Palestinians you would draft every year. It would become over time more and more Arab soldiers, but an army is very good at getting people to follow orders, and over time that would just be the culture, and you wouldn't be like, you'd have to follow the rules. And it also sort of brings people together. If you take people who went to school like in totally different neighborhoods, they never met each other, and you make them run miles together and crawl in the dirt and do push-ups and stuff, each Israeli, you make like 5 good Arab friends that you went through this experience with, and every Palestinian the other way, you sort of build this sense of like, we're in this together. I protect you, you protect me, and that sort of builds that, like in many other countries. Even for example, in Switzerland, they still have a draft, even though nobody wants to threaten Switzerland. But part of like bringing people together is making them serve. They just like they do 2 years, they train and whatever, and do some kind of reserve duty, just to have that sense of we're all in this together, you know.
But may I just make a point? We are not Switzerland. Like Switzerland is a neutral country in the middle of Europe, like that did its own thing. That
Europe used to be a pretty violent place. I mean, right now Europe is nice.
Rafi. That's true.
Well, I mean, yeah,
Rafi.
but
Yeah,
the history is different. Switzerland hasn't been in conflict.
Whoa, wait. One at a time.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rafi. You go first.
Okay, so that's sort of the vision, right? And so like each state would also have its local police force and stuff, and there would be no other army. There would be a single army that has tanks and planes and missiles and real serious weapons, and we would defend the border, and we would protect our country together. It's not there wouldn't be internal military running around the streets. Each state or province would have a police force that would be sort of integrated and mixed between the population that actually lives there, policing its own population. And they, in each place you'd have to work out how that plays out. Like in the Tel Aviv province, it would pretty much be like it is now, because it's, a place that's like 90%, Jewish or 95% and mostly secular. And that it would basically be what it is now. And, a place like Hebron would be like, 90% Arab, and there was a small Jewish community. They'll have to work it out, but actually they have a very similar culture anyways. The Jews that happen to live in Hebron are pretty like religious and conservative, and just like the Arabs that live there, and they'll get along. You wouldn't see a lot of mini skirts walking around there. That their vibe would work with each other, and so each place would have sort of a local police force. So the question is how to get from now our current like totally messed up situation to that's a process of like reconciliation. You have to like in order for people to accept each other, you have to like sort of reconcile with what your side did wrong, and accept the other as like being. In our proposal also we agreed that both people were considered native and indigenous, so like we would recognize that both sides have a deep history in the land, and that's like part of the philosophy. And also we included the idea of indigenous rights. Like there's a document called the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, and like I think it's sort of I like that document to sort of reimagine what it means to be a Jewish state, where even if we're a majority, we're a slight majority, we have a really significant non-Jewish population here. And so what does it mean to be that this is the homeland of the Jewish people? And so like I would say like I want a country where I'm recognized as indigenous, where I have the right to have school in my own culture and language and preservation of my symbols. I can have my flag and my national anthem and the things that matter to me as a Jew and as an Israeli, like those are still there, and they can still have their flag and their anthem and school and their language and their customs and holidays and stuff. All the soft things that make it what you want to be, like that I like about Israel, that should still be there. And what they would want in a state that they would think is Arab or Palestinian, that should be there for them, at least in the areas where they live. Yeah. So the understanding of recognizing each culture and respecting that it's from here, and also reconciling with the last 100 years that we've actually fought each other, and what certain things people did wrong on our side and on their side. And so I think reconciliation, though, in order to do it, you have to do it in tandem with a vision for how it's going to look at the end. Because if you say, it's sort of the basis for like, I want it to be like Zahir, hey, let's go do a show about, culture about Israel and Palestine. We're both really into history and different cultures and stuff. He's like, cool. But like, first, let's like write a plan for how to resolve our actual conflict, because we're actually still in a conflict. I want to have, what's the basis for our friendship? The basis is like, we have a vision that in common for how we want to resolve our problems. So the movement to sort of create peace, that is part of reconciliation. That's what's sort of missing when you go in the direction of two states, because then you're saying the end game is that I'm over here and you're over there. So what's the reason in this scenario for us to be friends? What are we building together? We're not. We're separating. But when it becomes like a civil rights movement, when I'm supporting your freedom and you're supporting my right to also be here, now we have something. Now we're allies and we have something in common. We want to build a functioning, strong country together, and that vision, that narrative helps people not want to kill each other. That if you would like the idea of how this would work is you'd get a referendum. You'd have 80% of the population on both sides would vote yes for this. If that was the case, that they really believed that we all wanted to live together in one country, you would have a whole lot less violence because that would be our mentality. We wouldn't want to be violent with the people we're just agreeing that we want to live in a country with. Actually, Zahir did a lot of polling. He did 3,500 Israelis and Palestinians. He would do Zoom calls, 10 of them at a time. And on the Palestinian side, we got 90% support amongst in Gaza, in all over the West Bank, amongst people across party lines. People support CFLP, Fatah, Hamas, even everything. People we presented this plan. You would recognize Jews as indigenous. You'd fight alongside them in the same army. You'd live in one country. People could live anywhere. Everyone's from here, and overwhelmingly supporting that vision, even amongst people you would think would want to fight you, because from their perspective, you want to fight them. That's what a conflict is.
Can I butt in with a comment?
Sure. I keep going on.
Yeah,
it's okay.
This plan sounds like this is Ethiopia. Your plan here of making little special areas for each ethnicity. Well, Jewish and Arab ethnicity. It sounds like Ethiopia ethno-federalism, which is what they have down there. And I mean,
maybe it's a little bit different. I mean, we
prevent violence. Ethiopia still has a lot of violence. They're all Ethiopian. They all work together as people who live on the land of Ethiopia. But I mean, hell, we just had a war down there.
To be fair, this whole region of the world has violence. It's a pretty aggressive, violent culture. And I think my instinct would be that no matter what we do, in the beginning, there's going to be some little skirmishes here and there, like people fighting. It's going to happen at least a little bit. But I don't know. I kind of like the sound of this idea, to be honest. The more I explore it, it sounds good.
It sounds good, but the point I'm making is that ethno-federalism doesn't really decrease violence or increase cooperation. Because when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, ethnicities are going to be at each other's throats if there's bad blood there. That's the reason why, you have nation states all over the world. I mean, mainly in Europe, not so much everywhere else, but these ethnicities want their own state, their own territory.
Right. And there's some truth to that. But to be fair, we're a much different situation than Ethiopia. It's a much the rate of PhDs of Palestinians is one of the highest in the world. The rate of literacy is high. I mean, I just amongst young Palestinians are really super educated. It's not we're both very advanced cultures in some ways, and we're also in a much smaller territory. It's a lot smaller than Ethiopia, and most places are much more well mixed here. You have for example, where I live in Jerusalem, we have this huge number of Palestinians right now, and we don't really have much violence here. It's certainly much safer than maybe where Chicago, where I came from, or London, or any of these places.
Definitely, 100%.
Yeah, you have stabbings and you have violence, but it's it's such a minuscule compared to even major cities in Western countries. So it's
definitely
the amount of getting along is overwhelming compared to the amount of not getting along. As I see it in my real life, I work with Palestinians and I go to the store and literally everyone who works at the store is Palestinian, and everyone's pretty cool most of the time. The places that were actually the people on the Israeli side, the places where they voted yes in favor were mainly in Jerusalem and in the settlements. Zahir thought all the liberals in Tel Aviv would vote yes, and then the people in the West Bank in Jerusalem would vote no. And it was the exact opposite of what he thought would play out. And it was more like people in Tel Aviv, and we like people in Tel Aviv, obviously, but they're a little more removed from the situation. So it's hard to imagine you're thinking of Palestinians, these people over there, whereas I can look out the window and see a wall in the distance, and I'm this is messed up. I go to a workplace where there's Palestinians, there's Israelis who live in the West Bank, and all sorts of different, and Haredim and everything. It's a multi-ethnic, mosaic here, and that's sort of the reality that I live in, and that's why you'd have each region is not going to be all Arabs here and all Jews here. Each region is kind of mixed, but sort of dealing with, the relative makeup. So we have a state of Jerusalem, which would be roughly, let's say, 2/3 Jewish and 1/3 Arab, which is roughly like the current population of the city of Jerusalem. And we're used to dealing with each other, so we should sort of, somewhat self-govern, because we can figure out how to get along. And there's places like in the Negev where it's, in the eastern Negev, you have a Bedouin majority. I don't know how to resolve the tensions between Bedouins and the Jews who live there, but they live there. They get along now. So like, let them figure out how to rule the Negev. And there's all sorts of issues with the Bedouins setting up like sort of tent villages that are unrecognized, and other Israelis who are living in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem being like, I have no idea what to do about this. Like, I have no idea what's going on down there.
So I agree with you, Rafi.
Yeah.
They could figure it out. What do we do about Druze and tensions in the north and between Druze and Israelis? I don't know what's going on let them figure it out. They live right next to each other. They know each other better than we know them. So that you'd have, and some of these areas that are Arab areas are areas that are in Israel anyways. Like the Western Galilee is part of 67 borders Israel anyways, and that's an Arab majority area.
Yeah.
So these would be like self-governing cantons that have the power to deal with their own shit, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And the things for the federal government, things we have in common. We need a military to protect our borders, to keep people from invading us and shooting missiles at us. That's important. We need to keep a strong currency. Overall, protect the environment, manage the major national resources, natural gas and stuff like that, and prevent oil spills and like the big stuff. But a lot of the local stuff, let the locals figure it out, because they would figure it out better than people in the other side of the country who have no idea what's going on there.
Yeah,
I agree with you fully. And I just to nitpick a little bit, because the plan sounds great. I'll be honest with you. I like the idea. I just think that there's certain things that could really mess it up along the way. So like, free movement of people between all the states is something that it's a must, like if I'm coming from Beersheba to go to Jerusalem, Hebron, Shechem, wherever, Gaza, it's critical that I can move around freely between the different cantons or states. One of the other things is that as a Jerusalemite, you know how important the old city is, and Arabite and Haram
Sure,
Sharif.
absolutely.
Would part of this deal, would you talk about the third temple? Because I know it's so important to so many Jews.
We definitely have talked about that in depth. We didn't really put the details of how we would envision that in the plan, because we don't want to really we don't want to start with really hot button issues. But in the plan, we would have, there would be a ministry to deal with, religious issues and sacred sites.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
all the Jewish people would have, there would be like a Jewish, council for our, religious and cultural needs, and the Palestinians could have an Arab council for their religious needs, or a Christian council, and various things. And there would be a ministry that would handle that, and including, and so like the Temple Mount itself would be under sort of some kind of federal control. It wouldn't be like necessarily part of the state of Jerusalem only. Like we wouldn't manage like the various like sacred sites. That would be managed by like a sacred sites ministry of some kind and stuff, and a sort of a department for that. But the rest of
federal district.
The rest of modern functioning Jerusalem, like where all the people live and stuff like that, we should, that we can manage.
In this plan, how quick do you think the barrier wall would come down if this plan was signed and everyone was happy with that?
Cutting out.
Oh, sorry. If this deal was agreed to by both populaces, how quick do you think the barrier wall in the West Bank would come down?
I think Rafi's away. No, he's back.
Okay, Kane, I missed that. Can you repeat, Amir?
Yeah, sure. If both sides agreed to this deal, how quickly do you think the barrier in the West Bank would come down, and there would be free movement of people and people?
The way I would imagine it would, I mean, I have no idea how it would play out, but I'm sort of imagining it like Berlin Wall. Like everyone votes. By the time you emotionally got to the point where like everyone voted to end the conflict, then it's basically over. Then who wants to fight anymore? And yeah, we would go to the wall, like 1 million people all together. We'd break it down and we'd throw a party, and that would be a national holiday the day we reunified the country.
Yeah, one big
Yeah.
hafla. I'm down. I'm down, Rafi.
Me too. But I guess the Gaza situation, like you said, is more complicated. And
Yeah.
would you say that Hamas has to be dealt with basically? If
Yeah.
you said that the majority there also supported it, right? So
Right. So, like, I mean, Hamas would have to agree to disarm, and so
That's
right, and
not gonna
they could be a
happen
I
ever.
would assume they're still a political party, and that if they
No.
agree to peace with us,
I
then
don't
they're
know. Like that's what concerns me the most. I think
Yeah.
is that I don't
Like,
see them really being open to it.
yeah. Like, I mean, exactly.
I mean,
It's
think
like
about what it
what you
means
said.
that
Hold on.
90%.
Can I butt in with
Sure,
something?
sure, Jared.
Because I was gonna say, because like this goes back to my point from earlier about militant groups, and you said, well, like there wouldn't be militant groups, there would only be one army. The whole point of militant groups is that they're not going to agree to this. They're militants. The army is going to have to forcefully disarm them, which
I'm not
is
sure.
going to be
Not
another
necessarily.
war to basically
Not
establish a
necessarily.
federation.
Not necessarily.
But you
Not
think
necessarily.
Palestinian Islamic Jihad is just going to go, all
No,
right, yeah,
Islamic-
like we agreed to work with them. Hamas is going to go,
No,
yeah, all
Islamic
right, we'll
Jihad
have the
may be
state
the
of Gaza.
exception,
We'll get
but
rid of all the Islamism out of our ideology. We'll just go, fuck it. We'll be nice people to the Jews, to the Heinis. We'll be fucking nice about it. Here's our AKs. Here's all our Qassams. Like, no, the army's going to have to fucking go in there and make them do it. And I'm afraid of that violence.
At one point, I thought, maybe it would start with Israel and the West Bank, and then we would just sort of give them an offer we can't refuse. We would have an army now full of Jews and Palestinians, and would say, guys, we all voted to have one country, and that includes you, and we're taking back our land there. But I don't think so, because you got to imagine, like, if like 80% of people in Gaza said that includes a whole lot of people who are in Hamas and support Hamas, and are sitting in the same dinner table with these people who are in Hamas, and they're going to be like, no, we all just voted to have one country, guys. I think we should go along. And yeah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad may be a problem. I think of the IRA when they sort of unified Northern Ireland. Right, there's going to be a couple of bad apples. That'll have to be dealt with. I don't think it's going to be the entirety of Hamas right now. I think a lot of them would say, okay, we agreed to be, to resolve our conflict. Everything we're upset about has sort of been resolved. Like, you accepted, I can now leave and go back to, a village in Israel that is important to me, even if I'm probably not going to do it because, I'd have to rebuild this village. I don't have the economic wherewithal, but no one's going to stop me. I don't, we're going to take down the wall in front of Gaza. Like, what am I complaining about? And we'll all, if I have some economic issues or other things I want to solve, we can work on that. But so then, for them, the conflict's over. And yet there are, like, Islamic Jihad. There are people that are nuts that will have to be, like there was in the IRA. There were leftovers that were like, no, we're not accepting Good Friday. Screw this. We still want to fight. There will be that.
Yeah.
And we'll have to beat the crap out of them. And that's what happens. When if 90% of Palestinians are on our side, they'll be beating the crap out of these same guys with us. Like, they wanted to have peace. So the couple of troublemakers are their enemies too. Now they're just people that are causing trouble in their country. And, Arabs know how to, put down people who are causing trouble in their country just fine. Like that.
To be fair, like, as you're saying that, I'm starting to think about it, and social pressure can be an extremely powerful force. And probably for the same reason that, as we were told by a few Palestinians now, if you put a camera on them, they'll lie about what they feel. A few people have said that. And I guess it works the same way in Gaza. I suppose if that's the society you live in, then to kill people so that you aren't, killed yourself, it's not unthinkable, I guess a lot of those people really are probably more open to it than they would admit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what, I mean, he interviewed hundreds of people in Gaza and people in the West Bank who were voting Hamas. Actually, Hamas is now more popular in the West Bank than it is in Gaza even. So it's almost become the opposite, because the people in Gaza have realized the philosophy of Hamas hasn't gotten them anywhere. That Hamas said, okay, we're gonna fight, guys. This is gonna do something, and you're like, you fought for 10 years, you haven't done shit. So and the West Bank thinks the reverse. They're like, you guys said you were gonna negotiate for 25 years, and you haven't done shit. So maybe Hamas is right. No, everyone's looking for something else. The grass is always greener. But but I think the movement to make it happen sort of creates that reconciliation. It's a snowball effect. It's it's like the March on Washington with Martin Luther King and stuff. Once you get that movement going, and people really see that they're on each other's side, that vibe of we're
You're
in this
right,
together
You're
builds
right.
up.
Inertia is the
Definitely.
biggest obstacle for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
And just to clarify a little bit, Rafi, like you divided the country up into how many states exactly, and where would they be? Like,
Can I show you? Can I screen share?
Sure. How would
if you
I?
can, yeah.
Yeah. Let me just see how
You know
I.
how to do that?
Yeah, I can figure it out. Screen
Yeah,
share. Here we
there's
go.
All right, so no, down at the bottom of the
Yeah, I
screen,
got
there's
share.
a button that says share.
Share
Yeah, you
screen.
click on that and it says share screen.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And what would the name of the country be?
The United States of
we
Jared.
played around a lot with the names. Do you see the map?
Yeah, I can see the map. That's it.
Okay, it's coming up now.
The country. What we wrote in the plan was called the United Federation of Israel and Palestine. I like that name, but we in Hebrew we like the name Ichud HaKodesh, the Yisrael Palestine. But also in the plan we wrote that colloquially you have the right to call anything what's the appropriate word for you in your native culture. So you can just call it Israel, and they can just call it Palestine. Like if you're on the phone, like yo, I'm in Israel, it's great. I'm in Ramallah. Ramallah, Israel is awesome, and they're like, yeah, I'm in Tel Aviv, Palestine. Tel Aviv, Palestine's cool. Like you're allowed to call the country what you want. But yeah, on like formal stationery in your passport, it would say like United Federation of Israel and Palestine, or it's something with those two words. And we've talked about like calling it the Jerusalem Federation because but I feel like people are so attached to their identities. You'd want to see the word Israel.
Yeah.
You can't have Israel taken off the map, and they're not going to have Palestine taken off the map. So it's going to be something like the Federation of Israel, Palestine, the Republic. We call it the United Federation. So I'll show you the map. This map has 16 states. Right, eight of them are Jewish majority, and 8 of them are Palestinian or Arab majority. So I'll show you can like the dark blue ones have above 80%, and most of them 90% Jewish. Like let's say where you guys live, this is the state of Tel Aviv Dan. So it's from like Rishon LeZion to Netanya, from Highway 6 to the sea. It's the most wealthy state in the country by far, the most populous. And like 95% Jewish, 90% secular. It's as Israeli Zionist as you can get. So like that would be the state that you would live in. So here, this is the state of Yerushalayim where I live in, and this state is about, let's say, 63% Jewish and 37% Arab. Includes all of East Jerusalem, and it also includes Bethlehem. So from Calandia down to Bethlehem to about Highway 6 to the Dead Sea. And it's got 1.7 million people, and it's about two-thirds Jewish, and includes all of Yerushalayim. And so what the light blue ones are, I call the mixed states with the Jewish majority, right? So so it has more like 2/3, 1/3. Those are the mixed states. Another example of a mixed state is the state of Ramallah. Like Ramallah, and in Hebrew you call it Medinat Binyamin, because it's includes like the Binyamin Regional Council, the historical Binyamin area. And so it includes all the way out from about Highway 6 to sort of the beginning of the Jordan Valley, from Calandia here until about Salfit, like just south of Ariel. And this is about, let's say, 40% Jewish and 60% Arab. And so it's also a mix. So it's a light green. So the light blues and the light greens are like Jewish majority, but with a significant Arab majority population. And for example, like the dark greens are like, this is the state of Jericho, Jordan Valley. So this is more like, almost 90% Arab, because in Jericho is got a quite large. So those are the sort of the darker colored ones. And so you end up with 5 like dark blues. There are 5 states that are overwhelmingly Jewish majority. And you have 5 dark greens that are overwhelmingly Arab majority, and 3 of each that are Jewish majority, but about 2/3 Jewish and 1/3 Arab, or Jewish or Arab majority, about 2/3. Another one that's sort of a mix is Eastern Negev, where you have a really large Bedouin population. This is entirely within what's now the state of Israel. And, right, so this is where all the Bedouin live, but you also have Dimona, Arad, and Ein Bokek.
And how would these particular areas be governed? The ones that are more mixed, like how would they be organized?
I started writing up actually a state constitution for Jerusalem as like just an example of what that looks like. I sort of looked at, state constitutions, also from Switzerland and also from the U.S. I really like the constitutions of Switzerland and the U.S. They seem to be pretty neutral in their language and pretty, thorough. So you basically have regions. I could show you sort of beyond the map. I could show you what the district map looks like. So this is a map that sort of lets you see like the guts of it. So let's say like Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
So this is, and I color coded it again so you can really see like what we're talking about. So this is like Medina Yerushalayim. So this is Modin, and it's like over with like 99% Jewish. This is the Beit Shemesh area, overwhelmingly Jewish. This is like southwest Jerusalem. Here's West Jerusalem where I live, right? And so the blue areas are like 98% Jewish. The green areas are like 98% Palestinians, and then this one is maybe like 90%. This is like Gush Etzion. It's got a couple of Arab villages in there, but it's still pretty Jewish. And this is Bethlehem area, which is overwhelmingly Palestinian. Here was I made this yellow because it's a mixed region. This includes the neighborhood of Gilo, also Beit Zafafa. This is like parts of like southern Jerusalem where that's Arab. Also the old city, which is also mixed. So basically, each state would be its own like mini federation. You have a state parliament that each one of these regions or districts gets like 2 state senators, and then based for every, let's say, 25,000 people, you get another state House of Representatives, and you have a state governor and a lieutenant governor, and they're sort of governed based on the proportion of the people who live there. So the state of Yerushalayim would be governed like a place that had 2/3 Jewish and a 1/3 Arab population. So it's sort of having to balance out, and we have a large Haredi population, so we have to make rules that sort of work for everybody, and everyone would get a voice, and that's sort of how it would. So each state would be governed like democratically, and you can see like where like the Tel Aviv state, it's almost there's like a mixed area in Lud and Ramla. There's in Yafo, you have like we made a mixed district. These are like the yellows I did as mixed districts. There's one green district up in Tira. I made the border is Highway 6, so you have like one little Arab area, but overwhelmingly it's Jewish areas. You have Netanya, Kfar Saba, Herzliya, Tel Aviv.
What does Haifa look like?
Okay, so here's Haifa. Here's the state of Haifa. So I made Haifa like down to like North Haifa, which is where it has like the big Arab neighborhoods. So I made that yellow, just sort of it's symbolic. It's a mixed area. There's also like over here in Farudis, and there's sort of I did this a light green because there's Jews and Arabs, and like Jiz Zarqa, and you have Magan Machel. You have like, this is sort of a little bit of a mixed area. You also have Har Carmel, which is a Druze area. I put them in like purple, but it's still like a good 90% Jewish Haifa, so it's overall it's a dark blue. And then here was like the
surprised me, I must say.
Yeah, well, it feels very mixed up here.
Yeah, that actually.
Yeah. And once you see, this is what the north really looks like, right? You have tons of. These are all Palestinians. These are our Circassians. You have Druze. You have Maronite Christians up here. You have a mixed. You have Akko, which has Arabs and Jews. So this is actually an Arab majority, but not even Palestinian. It's a mix of Druze, Maronite Christians, and Palestinians, and a lot of Jews. It's a very. I mean, I know people who live up there. My friend Adar lives up there, so it's a very cool area where.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
It's great. It's one of the most beautiful areas.
Akko. It's a great town. It's real fun.
It's almost like the boroughs and the local councils that we have in England.
It's very similar.
Exactly. As I say, these essentially are just the counties of the American states. This is the United States squished down on a scale it really wasn't meant to be squished down to. But I mean, hell, it seems well thought out.
Yeah, well thought. On paper, it seems so simplistic. Like you wonder why they haven't done this for the past 70 years.
People
but that's also the thing. On paper, it seems really good, and there's a lot of thought into it. But there's still a lot of underlying issues that need to be talked about, just outside of figuring out what the government's going to look like.
Sure.
I truly think if before we can even begin to talk about what a government would look like in the future, if we do go down this path, we need like a South African style Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Well, that happened sort of after the peace, but that kind of happened after the peace. But our idea is that I think you need to do them simultaneously. Yeah. It's hard to get to the point where they want to talk to you and be friends while you still feel like you're in a conflict. There's like this idea of like I met the other day a Palestinian from Nazareth, actually, or who's an Israeli Arab ostensibly, right? But he's like, I love Jews. Jews are my brothers, but I just don't like the Zionists. And I like told him in Arabic, like, "Ya sorry, like, I'm sorry, my bro, but I'm also a Zionist, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
speak a little bit of Arabic, so I was like telling him,
Yeah.
you know, like there's lots of people who are Zionists who are pretty cool with Arabs. They actually did a poll that amongst Israeli Jews, like only 22% of people who like think of themselves as Zionist, secular, religious nationalist would say that they have any like real problem with Arabs, that they like dislike Arab or Arab culture. Like overwhelming majority of people who think of themselves as Zionists are not really like anti-Arabs, you know.
No,
And
there's no need
the
to
most
be.
right, the most anti-Arab group was actually like the Haredi, and not because they know better, just because they don't have like internet and TV. They haven't met a lot of Arabs, but like
It's different education.
They kind of
yeah,
cloister
so I
themselves
had a
off.
company where we had, Palestinian workers, and the people who were the most Zionist, like people who were like with the Keepers Through Gaza, were all like hanging out with the Palestinians all the time, eating shawarma together. And like the Haredim were like, oh, I don't know, man, there's Arabs here. Like, is it okay? Then they realized that we were cool with them, so they eventually were like, they lightened up a little bit. But yeah, so it's about, bridging that gap and also getting over like the idea of figuring out an alternative terminology to saying I like Jews, but I don't like Zionists, when like 99% of us call ourselves Zionists. And if they like, as long as you tell me you're anti-Zionist, that's sort of like breaking down the conversation. I'm not going to say I'm not a Zionist. That's like, an integral part of my self-identity. At the same time, there's like, I could read statements from like some of the early Zionist thinkers who were very colonials. I think like they wrote actually abhorrent things and said, that these are savages and we should displace them. And I'm like, I would totally not agree with any of the things they would say. There's Zionist thinkers I really like, and Martin Buber and Gershon Shalom, and the more, the Brit Shalom kind of thinkers that said, we're coming back to our ancestral homeland, but there's other people here. We need to find a way to work together if we're gonna do it. And you need one of the ideas I've come along is the idea of consent. I have a friend Saif who did a debate. I don't know if you know Rudy Rothman. He debated. So my friend Rudy, I also have a friend of mine. So Rudy and Saif debated, and I'm like, I agree with everything Saif says except for one thing. He said, if the Jews wanted to come here, they needed to get consent from us. And I'm like, why do I need your consent, man? This is my homeland. Who are you to tell me no? But then over the time I got to know him and talking to him, was like, if any Jew wants to come here, I have no problem with Jews coming here. I think every Jew should be able to come here. But like, you have to have a conversation with me if you're going to come here, and not like, so that you don't mess up my life and you coming back. We got to find a way so you can come back and not screw things up for me. So like, that's how you sort of base what it means reconciliation. So I think we need to base somehow, you need to have like retroactive consent. They need to understand that, like, you need to understand that we needed to like have that conversation and we didn't. And it's not necessarily entirely our fault. They didn't have such good leadership and they weren't very open either. But that's what should have happened then, and that's what we need to do now. We need to have that conversation about accepting the fact that I'm very attached to this place. This is the land of my history for thousands of years, and that this is the most important place in the world to me. And they feel very similar about this place, and being cool with that, not starting to say that they're savages that we need to push out of the land, and not that they're saying, oh, these are European colonizers and stuff. We need to come up with a language that like brings people together and say, okay, yes, we both have deep roots in this land that we've been here for a very long time. We're very attached to, that you've had villages, that you've had, many generations, and your grandfather built this house, and this is very important to you. And I get that. And like, we have, stories in our Tanakh, our Bible, and the Midrash, and everything that talks about this land, and really like continuous history for thousands of years in this place that's very meaningful to us. And then we come here and we have our personal experiences, all the places I've ever been in Israel and the people I know from here. And it's just, and most Israelis have actually been born here by this point, this is their whole life.
Yeah.
So really, just accepting all that history, accepting the bad. I think Zahir said something really good. Like, what gives you more right to be here is being able to, accept that there was messed up things that happened, just like, the Americans, when they took over America from the Indians. You have to accept that some of the things you did were fucked up, and like it, and be okay with that. And when you accept that, we're actually more cool with you guys being here. Once you've made that leap, then I believe you that you've been here, that you have roots here from thousands of years ago. I'm not arguing about that. Like, I understand that there's Jewish, archaeological sites all over this country. Like that that rings true,
Mhm.
Yeah.
For sure,
Yeah.
Rafi. And I think that that kind of dialogue between the two peoples, understanding that they both have roots in the land, is so important, because there's lots of Israelis that are like, Palestinians don't even exist. They're Arabs that just recently had a Palestinian national movement and and they're not even a real people and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And same on the other side, you have Palestinians that, no, river to the sea, we're going to liberate Palestine, Palestine, Horia, and that's it, like that's going to be what's happening. So those kind of extremists, they need to kind of be pushed to the sideline and
Yeah. Well, I
just
think
take
we shouldn't be able to be okay with the idea from the river to the sea, but like without feeling threatened, because that's what I kind of feel like from the river to the sea, but not in a way that like dominates them. I don't say like I want it to be Israel from the river to the sea, and like the same way you don't want it to be Palestine from the river to the sea, and it could be like it should be like the sovereignty of the people from the river to the sea, like a country that represents all of us from the river to the sea.
But I mean, but the issue with these political slogans is that the way it's used is in that extremist manner. Because like, if you hear a Palestinian say "from the river to the sea," you know exactly what they mean, and it's ethnic cleansing.
I don't. Yeah, maybe if you're depends who. Like I met this kid from Hebron, this really like nice, like a 15-year-old kid who was on our server, and he asked me like, how would you feel if it was all Palestine, but it was equal? And I'm like, well, is it a democracy? It's not like a dictatorship of Mahmoud Abbas, but there's a democratic country from the river to the sea that represents. I mean, he's a very innocent young kid that represents all of us. I'm like, I mean, I don't care if you want to call that Palestine, and I'll call that Israel, and we can be fine. Then that works for me. I'm okay with that. If that's how you feel, if you feel like Jaffa is part of Palestine, I feel like Hebron is part of Israel, and that shouldn't be mutually threatening. We can be okay with our identities.
Yeah, I'm not saying
I don't have to smash you to be true to myself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that like just because like the idea itself of having a say from the river to the sea. What I'm saying is that we can't excuse the fact that these political slogans on both sides.
Sure, I think
like a lot of them are extremist in nature. The very meaning of these slogans are extremist.
Sure. You also need to work. I mean, one of the things we worked on. I mean, if you've heard Zahir talk lately, we try to work on finding the optimal language that really resonates with the other side, but still gets what we want across. Because there's a lot of talking across each other where people don't really get what they mean. Like that's how you get to the idea of Palestinians are a fake people. Like what does it mean to be a fake people? So like Palestine, it was a name for this region, but 100 years before 100 years ago, they didn't really call themselves Palestinians. That doesn't mean they're not a people. There were people who lived here. They originally thought that they were going to be the southern part of Syria and that this would be Greater Syria. And then Syria, there was Sykes-Picot, and Syria was seeming like it was going to be a different mandate and it was going to become its own country. And so like, oh shit, we're not going to be part of Syria. We need a new plan. Okay, we'll call it Palestine. And that's because that's a name that was sort of, over time talked about in the region. The Zionists also called it Palestine. So that was obviously a thing. They have like a different identity themselves. Like most of them, there's the Shia clans, in the major cities. These are the Ishmaelites. They're either Nabatean or they're Kedarites. These are like their mythology are descendants from Ishmaelites. They're from originally sort of fomented in what's now the Negev Desert and the Sinai. This was they were here around the time of ancient Israel. They were our direct neighbors to the south for much of that period. And those are sort of the major clans. And then there's the Falachim, which are like the farmers and stuff. And a lot of them actually have Jewish roots or Samaritan roots. If you get to know them, they'll tell you about that. And the Christians also. And then they also have Druze and Bedouin. And Bedouin are also related to the Ashia clans, but they're sort of still nomadic, whereas the clans that settled in the cities are the more like sophisticated versions of those. So those are their like real identities. But then they use this term Palestinian to sort of an umbrella term for everyone who lived here. They're like, we're not going to call us the Federation of the Ashia, the Falachim, and the Druze and the Armenians. We're just going to all call ourselves Palestinians. It's much more easier to select one name. But it doesn't mean they're fake. They each different group here has a history in this land that's very old. You know.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
In this model that you have, Rafi, I really love the energy and I really love the amount of dedication that you've put into this project, and my hat goes off to you, mate. Really, I think there's two things that are critical to a plan like this working. One is disarming Hamas,
Yeah.
Sure.
and that is something that there's many ways of doing that non-militarily, but that's going to be a process.
It's going to
And
be
the
ugly no matter what.
Yeah, and the second thing is like property rights, land rights, because this is a huge thing here. So there's plenty of Jews that would want to go and settle in Nablus, right, and be near Kever Yosef, and there's plenty of Jews that would want to move to Hebron and to Bethlehem even, and to many other places. And I'm sure there will be Palestinians who in your plan get the right of return and that will want to go to Akka and want to go to Haifa and Jaffa. And I'm sure there may be Jews that would even want to go back to Gaza. So my question is, how could we legislate for that?
Right. So what we put in the plan, and maybe I'll go back to this picture. So basically, like each state, we do that sort of the Canadian model in terms of new immigrants. So let's say Jerusalem is like 2/3 Jewish and 1/3 Palestinian. So they would let of new immigrants come in. They would let a majority of them be Jewish and the minority of them be Palestinian. And I can tell you from someone who lives in Jerusalem, for the vast majority of it, Arabs will move to Arab neighborhoods and Jews will move to Jewish neighborhoods. That's really how these people behave. We have 2 million Palestinians who live in Israel now, and they don't move to Ramat Gan. They just don't. They legally can, but you don't walk outside and you don't have a lot of Arabs there. They tend to. And I had a good friend who was Palestinian from the north who went to the Hebrew U, and she ended up living in an Arab neighborhood on the other side of town. I'm like, why don't you just live in the Jewish neighborhood, like right near the university? And she's like, what would I do in there? Like nobody, I don't know. I don't speak, that's my culture. What am I doing there? Actually, she spoke better Hebrew than me, but she's just like, I feel weird. And I would feel equally weird moving into an Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem. Like, I think in order to get people to mix, there's like a handful of places where they made like half and half neighborhoods where they set up like these mini like yeshuvs. And they had to work, and there are only a few hundred people. There's like Segev Shalom down near Beersheba and Neve Shalom, like outside of Yerushalayim. To make a mixed community, that was effort to convince people to do it.
It worked.
Right. So getting people to integrate is actually harder than they actually would. They'll self-segregate without very much effort. So they'll move to your area, but most likely they'll move to Arab neighborhoods of Ramla, or maybe some of them will move to Old Jaffa if they're wealthy, or some of the Arab towns around the coast. But like for the most part, they're going to move to a place where there's other Arabs. And you could build a couple new Arab cities and promote it that it's going to be a new Arab town, and they'll probably move there. They're not likely to start moving to Jewish neighborhoods in mass. Like that just won't. Maybe 50 years down the line when everyone's really cool, and by then who cares? But that's not something like that would actually happen. For better or worse. Like we wanted to have a plan where you could create new mixed areas. Like you could, we have something called a acceptance committee. So like up to 400, a small town up to 400 people, they get to have an acceptance committee to come into their town. So we thought maybe for a mixed town, you could have it up to 1,000 people, and they would bring 500 Jews and 500 Palestinians, and they would sort of like build this new mixed town together. And then after that, it would be like the Garin, like the center of a new mixed area. But like, they're not all just gonna. The Jews who are going to move to Hebron will move to like the small Jewish area of Hebron, or they'll move to Kiryat Arba or something. It's very unlikely they're all going to start moving into the Arab neighborhoods until, on a cultural level, like that's cool. So in order for that to be cool, it's that actual community has to like open their doors to them in that way. And because there's still a human element here. So it's not all going to be instantly where everyone's moving next door and everyone's next door neighbors and they're all having barbecues together.
Would be nice.
It'd be nice. But that's going to take some time, but definitely a way to start that is that sort of mix, that movement together towards this future together. Like believe in this vision. We don't know how long it would take, and then work towards making it happen. And that's, you got to change hearts and minds.
For sure, I totally agree with that. The one thing, like, I don't know about Jerusalem because I see that it's majority Jewish area. It's a mixed area there designated, but do you think there would be any contention in the fact that it's here seen as a Jewish area because it's like one of the main cities, right?
Sure, we had different color coding. I ended up going with a lighter blue because I had like a yellow, and then it looked too broken up. It looked like it was too dissimilar on the Jewish area. So then I went with like a dark blue and a light blue. I didn't have so much complaints with Palestinians. The most issues were the issues of the Temple Mount, like what happens to that. And so I said that's that's outside of the boundaries of the state. That's ruled by a separate, department of the government. That's, a separate committee of, rabbis and sheikhs or whatever that we would get together and what do they think is fair. And yeah, I have all sorts of ideas of what to really do with the Temple Mount, but yeah, let's try to get to one step at a time,
One step at a time.
Yeah. Before we start dealing with something so intractable as religion.
Yeah. Well, I think it is like a pretty big obstacle, though. The religious sides, on both sides, the religious are going to be the hardest to sway, I would imagine.
I don't know. Like in our polling, we got amongst religious people, they were more likely to accept this plan than secular people, especially like people who live in the West Bank. People that are called settlers. Although Rudy asked me not to use the term settler, so I'm trying to say, Jewish residents of the West Bank. And so those kind of people tended to vote for this plan more than actually people in Tel Aviv who were a little more skeptical. They're like, I don't know, there's going to be Arabs moving into my neighborhood. I don't know how I feel about this. Things are okay for me now. And trying to convince that demographic was more challenging. Whereas people who live right next to Arabs all the time, they're like, wait, I can live my exact same life now, and the people next to me won't hate me anymore. I'm like, exactly. And there'll be no walls, and you won't have to walk around with guns, and people will be cool. They're like, that sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, exposure is a huge thing when it comes to human psychology.
Yeah,
sure.
They're so far removed from everything that's going on, all the conflict side of things. It's not Tel Aviv. Like Tel Aviv is in a different world completely to that.
Yeah. You guys don't see it, and that's what I get.
Just why everything is Israeli
yells
loudly and proudly. Fuck Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Jared doesn't like.
I'm living surrounded.
I don't like Tel Aviv.
And it's fine, but I also feel that I know stories of Palestinians telling me they're worried about their houses getting demolished, and Jews I know who are worried about their houses getting demolished, and there's a giant wall in the way and checkpoints, and like where we live is kind of messed up. Like where you live, things are pretty cool. So we're reporting you from the front lines. Things are messed up over here. We need to do something about this.
No, I agree with you, Rafi. I 100% agree, and I think that I'm from the south originally. And I think that the country has left the Negev just, to be wild, wild west for so long now. And I think in this kind of plan, if we can delegate power to local leaders and local council leaders down there, it will help solve the issue. These Bedouins are living their traditional life. I don't have anything against that. But I do have something against the state not dealing with taking care of them, right? Providing infrastructure,
of course. They're citizens. They're entitled to state benefits.
The reality is, we don't know what to do. The guy's in Tel Aviv, and I'm in Jerusalem. I don't know how to solve the problem with the Bedouins. I'd love to figure it out. But I figured the people who are down there, they could talk to them and say, "Listen, guys, what do you guys need? How could we, make things work better for you? You have, high unemployment. There's high crime over here. Let's pull it together, guys." And I think
I guess there's a certain level of problem where the state can get involved too. The minor stuff can be solved locally, and if it's that serious a problem, I guess then the state can step in.
Affecting the whole country, then that's why we have a federal parliament, and they'll say, okay, this situation is this is serious. Obviously, if there's a major security
humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, and all sorts of stuff that they for serious issues,
they could get involved.
That's why you have this sort of the big brother. But for local issues can be solved by local people. That's better because they understand local issues better.
100%, 100%. And I think that if this model was to work, we would have to have very, very strict laws and actually stick to those laws. So, illegal weaponry and that kind of stuff, we'd have to be so tough on that kind of stuff where it's not like that today, as and, there's so many weapons flying around this country.
Because of this conflict, the Arabs don't like to participate, and then they have high crime in their neighborhoods. It's it's a revolving cycle of like, you guys need to get involved in your community, but like
Exactly.
your conflict with the Zionists is not enabling you to cooperate. So like let's squash the beef, get over the conflict, and actually solve our real problems.
Exactly, the real issues on the ground. I can remember a friend from England came over with his girlfriend a year and a half ago, and we were driving through Rahat to get to my kibbutz, and there was a protest in the main roundabout. Lots of signs in Hebrew and Arabic against the violence in the community over there, and it's just something that's just been left. It's like, oh, that's not our problem. Like that, we'll just leave it to them, and nothing gets solved. So I think that in a model like you've created, you have much more ability to take care of local issues, infrastructure, crime, a wide range of topics.
Like the people in Rahat will have representatives. They'll have voted for a state senator that's sitting in a parliament, maybe in Beersheba, and they'll all have to be like, okay, the greater Beersheba area has some issues, and let's go fix them. And amongst the people who live here, between Rahat and Beersheba and the kibbutzim around, and let's take care of the business.
Definitely.
I think like apprehension is inevitable. There's always going to be some people that are apprehensive, and I think the way to deal with that is that we're in a situation where we don't have any better options. Like, this is sounding pretty good, and the potential issues are like speculative, and also like people tend to forget that people in the end care about themselves mostly. Like, we don't need to worry too much about being attacked by the other side, because they're thinking exactly the same thing. Most people
we haven't had a lot of the level of violence is pretty low, and in Israel proper, it's almost nothing. Israeli Arabs don't attack you guys, like, and even Jerusalem Arabs who don't even have citizenship don't even attack me. So if we spread that to everywhere else, the level of violence here would be probably significantly lower than most Western countries, certainly safer than America, where I used to live. So it's So I think the future is possible. You just like in many other places in Northern Ireland or South Africa or various places where you had problems and people got together and solved them.
Yeah. Now we're running out of time, but I want to ask one more thing before we wrap this up, Rafi. It's another question about how the federation is going to function, and I know I've been particularly hard on this plan, harder than Amir or Kane on the whole thing, but that's just because I'm treating it like this is a real possibility. Like, if this is going to be the country I'm going to live in, I want to, know how I feel about it.
Sure, absolutely, fair enough.
I'm just treating it like a real option. So when it comes to, like, say, the Senate, just because I see a lot of the issues that I have with the American system being brought over here, such as empowering a minority to override a very substantial majority in certain political issues. How does the federation account for that? Let's say the Senate, if all the states are equal in the Senate, then states like Tel Aviv and Haifa and Jerusalem, which are going to be huge, they could potentially be overridden by just a couple of, by a small coalition of say some of the West Bank states.
Two houses. You also have the House of Representatives, which is equal by population. So you have that sort of balance by region and balance by total population. But what I wanted to get rid of that we have here in Israel now is the coalition system. I think that's a disaster.
Get rid of it.
Get rid. I want to have elections at regular intervals. You elect a representative who's from where you are, and he goes to Jerusalem and he represents your issues. So that's the first step, and that there's no having to form a coalition. You don't have party leaders in charge of ministries that they had no experience to run. You want someone to run the the Ministry of Education. The guy who ran a school system for 20 years and was amazing at it. You pick him. Pick real professionals to do things. And we divided up, basically the Senate would pick certain ministries. We'd have a president and we'd have a chairman, and each one of them would get to select which would have certain responsibilities to pick certain ministries. The president would pick the foreign minister and the minister of defense. The chairman would pick sort of the education minister and the environment. And the Senate would pick the the Minister of Justice, so that stops becoming a hockey puck to play around with, and the Minister of Immigration, that's going to be a very contentious issue, obviously, and the Ministry of Holy Sites, because that's also, so that we figured leave that to the Senate and have that always be sort of even, and the executives would pick the other ministries. And so we got rid of that system, so you don't have a disproportionate power amongst Haredim, for example, which is what we have now in our current situation. You either have the right lining up with Haredim, and they have to form within 2 weeks a coalition agreement and agree to a whole bunch of stuff they don't believe in order to, otherwise we have to go to another election, or the left does the same thing, or eventually the left and the right gets pissed off enough with the Haredim, like what's going to happen now, most likely, and then they're going to form a government, which isn't going to last either because they don't agree with each other either. You're going to have Meretz and Naftali Bennett sitting together, and what are they going to agree on? So you form these coalitions about people that have a completely different ideology. Instead, you would just elect the parliament and let them spend the next 4 years working it out bill by bill. Like, do we think we should have a train from Beersheba to Eilat? All in favor say aye, all not in favor no. Should we, prevent environmental disasters in the Negev? All in favor aye. One issue, should we give more money to elderly? Deal with one thing at a time, and then and find things that are reasonable that you agree with. And if you can't all agree to it, it's probably not that reasonable. So then that's what I think is the way forward. Have a government that just you elect at regular intervals and make them deal with one issue at a time.
Fantastic, Rafi. It's been a real pleasure having you on today and presenting your plan. It'd be great to talk again soon.
Yeah. By the way, before you go,
sure.
Do you have a thing where you can let people who want to see the map and just look at it like you want to give us a link that we can put in the video description?
Sure. We're building a site called Eretz Ard. I'll try to give you the link to sign up, and we're as I hear is in the middle of building the site. Also, if you go to the Discord with Sulfa, we got with the plans link, and you can reach out to me.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll make sure to have that in the description, guys.
Absolutely.
It's been great. But unfortunately, the episode's over.
Let's go.
Yeah.